18th and 19th. If you would, if you said it, I somehow missed it. Okay. I can't remember. Okay. What I do know is students who can say that back to central school, and I also had some touch to them about insurance.
Audio is kind of funny. I can hear like quiet voices,
Now
but
so we hear you loud and clear.
there
Can
you
you
go.
hear us? We hear you loud and clear.
I can hear you now.
Okay, she says okay now.
Okay, so yeah, now the owl is showing the green bar going up and down. Before
Perfect.
it wasn't.
Yep, I just heard little whisperings before, but I hear you now.
Great. Alrighty, so planning commission meeting June 2nd. In person, we have Chapin, Steve, and Mickey. And online, we have Hannah and Shayla. Nobody else is in the attendee side of things.
All right. I'm having a little bit of tech problems, but I can hear you and see you, and maybe I'll get it so you can see me soon. But why don't we start? Um, is the first thing on the agenda, I assume, is the minutes.
I didn't have any suggested changes.
I made a couple of minor just edits, but otherwise.
Yeah, same. I didn't have anything.
All right, can I get a motion to approve the minutes with the minor edits?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second. Oops.
You got a second and a third.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right. Awesome. Sorry, just still trying to get the agenda up. If somebody else has it up and can help me out.
Only two occasional comments.
Do you want me to send you a link to it?
Nope, there we go.
There we go. Oh, there you go.
All right. All righty. Amendments, Taft Corners.
So possibly a short meeting tonight, and thanks for folks who were able to make it out last week on an off night to stroll around Taft Corners with our consultant. Really just wanted to use a little bit of meeting time tonight to recap any insights folks had from being out in the field, whether it was from what you saw with the existing buildings, or what you saw with the sites that are undeveloped, or anything in between. Just as an update, we're in sort of daily conversation with Jeff Farrell about sort of his laundry list of tweaks to the code. And some of them we didn't talk about in a whole lot of detail out on site, but a lot of them are just related to either issues that came up when we were reviewing the hotel. I don't think the draft you'll see would be entirely favorable to the hotel project, but it raised some interesting issues about grades and when we have streets on 4% slopes versus flat, et cetera. Jeff's working on that kind of thing, but it would be really helpful for me and Emily to hear anything that folks took away from that or wanted to make sure was considered in any kind of an update to that provision or to that chapter of bylaws.
Is Jeff not gonna be on Zoom with us today?
I don't think he's on Zoom with us tonight.
Okay.
But we'll
So
send it along.
I do have, first of all, I really trust his background working with staff on technical things like that. I almost feel like, just tell me what we should improve. But the place where we had put in our, it was in the minutes we just reviewed last meeting,
Mhm.
that we were worried about not having enough green space, not having enough space for parks, because it's one thing to have that you can walk to somewhere that has trees. It's another thing to be able to play a baseball game. And we also mentioned that we thought we needed green spaces that were shared stormwater, because that would give us more green. And so those were in our minutes that we just read. When I brought that up with, while we we're in the field with Jeff, he said, well, the regulating plan shows it's just a 7-minute walk, whatever, from anywhere to a green space. And that wasn't answering the question that I had, which was, we're putting residents there, where are our community parks, you know, and our equity part of our town plan, we say where we have people, we need to have facilities.
Mhm.
And we don't have anywhere blocked out for that. And the Parks and Rec is doing a master plan study, making some suggestions, but I just think our regulating plan somehow needs to be updated to show the need for a community park or two
Mhm.
in Taft Corners, and for more green space than the bit that is outlined.
Okay. You know, I was looking at the regulating plan with a prospective developer today, just kind of talking through what it all meant and what the green meant and what the streets meant, et cetera. And one of the things I found myself saying about the part I was talking about was, well, you know, we have these streets down because they express a desire for blocks that are roughly 300 to 400 feet on a side and, you know, have this walkable dimension, but we fully expect a development proposal to ask to move them around as they determine what the constraints are and, you know, what the desired pattern is. It expresses an idea and a general theme, not necessarily in that case, you know, these streets must go exactly in these locations. And I wonder about thinking about those green spaces the same way, particularly by the time we're drafting this up to actually consider it for adoption, which might not be till after the end of the summer or beyond. We had an opportunity to get Jeff's work, so we took it.
Yeah.
But we may not roll right into adoption with this. To think about what is the adequate size, how does it line up with what the recreation master plan envisions? And just map a couple of squares of that size.
Say they don't say exactly here, but we need this.
This needs to go somewhere. So if somebody comes in and proposes to develop on it, first it, you know, it does trigger that official map process of asking the select board, you know, do you want to buy it from me? I want to put a building there. And second, if there's a map amendment that comes along with a development request, there's an opportunity for the planning commission to say, well, if not here, then here, which is like what you did with the Trader Lane Breeze. Okay, well, let's keep it the same size, shift it down the line. So, yeah, and I think where there might have been less communication, you know, Jeff did 2.5-minute walk circles around all of the little identified green spaces, but some of them, as you know, are, you know, pocket park size. And so if there's a desire for a place to do much more, you know, structured, you know, even like a 3/4 size soccer field or a, you know, structured activity, that is something different. And we can talk about how to, you know, try to integrate that in.
Yes, and I think, and I see things like exercise trails, what do you call those when you have?
Chin up bars.
Yeah, you have bars and stuff at stations along a walking trail.
Yeah.
That kind of thing around stormwater infrastructure or something, I feel that's not represented in the regulating plan. And yet I think all of us in our head have this idea of making more places for people to recreate and be in green spaces.
Matt, do we know when that rec master plan is gonna be done? I think it's probably a Todd question.
Next couple of months, as far as I know, but I hadn't heard a date. They were pretty far into it a couple of months ago when they were asking us questions, so.
I'm wondering if it makes sense to get a planning commission and recreation committee meeting together. I don't think the committee meets in the summertime because of all the programming stuff.
Right.
But maybe they would wanna come to a planning commission meeting during the summer, or is it something that's kicked off like in September, where we have that more focused discussion about the official map and the regulating plan map.
I wonder if the determination of the date for that joint meeting, which I love, by the way, might be best established after we find out kind of where they are in the process. If we let it get too far down the road, it might.
They did, yeah, because they did charrettes and a couple of meetings getting input from the public months ago. Was it in the winter or was it? even
Yeah,
before
I
that?
think they had one in April too.
Okay,
That
they
might have
had a
been.
couple. And of course, they were upended by the not being able to do what they planned to do at Allenbrook School, although they are adding one field there, I believe, and a little bit of parking. But, or at least that's in their current plan. But I have a feeling they're pretty far along, and I totally think we should be dovetailing with that. In other words, we shouldn't be in conflict with what they're coming up with. We should be facilitating each other.
I'll add a comment from last week as well, and I hope I can articulate it properly. There's a certain irony in what we did. I think, Emily, I think I mentioned it to you that when I walk around Williston, I'm always amazed how green it actually is. There's a lot more that you see walking than you do when you're driving. And as we develop the walking plan for Williston, I hope, I'm not even sure how to say this, but when people are driving, they're not gonna see it because they're zipping by it so quickly. And yet when you walk, there's a lot going on. I mean, I was amazed at the size of some of the trees that are on the sidewalks over by the tire place and so on. I mean, there's some pretty mature trees over there. And anyway, I echo what you said. That was my question was, it looks like when I walk anyway, we're doing the right things. There is green. But I just want to make sure that it's adequately codified and planned, to Chapin's point, to make sure that we continue that. And make sure that that's a priority. Yeah, I noted, of course, because of the weather we had, how sun blasted the whole area is, and how nice it will be to have shade. Whether it's trees or just you get a tighter pattern of buildings, so there's a shady side of the street part of the day.
Yeah.
It was really, really intense sun for, 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It wasn't high noon.
Umbrella for shade.
Smart one.
Tell us about it, Robin.
When
Yeah.
we did that thing that when we were doing the town plan and we all brought in kind of inspirational town plans, we picked one. One of the town plans we looked at was from Holland. It was the one that I brought, and they had tree coverage, like they had tree coverage maps. Kind of as like this is where we are and this is our goal, or kind of like greenery coverage, which I thought was a really cool way, and like really noticed when we were walking in the heat of like, oh, this drastically impacts how comfortable it is to walk outside as a person and not just like zoom around as a car. Which is kind of, yeah, being able to measure it and visualize it on a map also helps.
Very
Be like,
cool.
we are moving towards this, or it's a goal, or and this is how we know.
Yeah, Shayla, you had your hand raised. Sorry about the Zoom issue there.
You have to make her a panelist.
Yeah, she should be a panelist now.
She'd email, but.
Sorry, guys, as soon as I'm a panelist, I only heard every third word.
No.
Oh, no.
Okay, well, while we wait for,
Hannah, can you take over? She says.
yeah,
She can talk most likely. My observation though is that seems like there's a lot of areas that are not ready for development, like the place where all the slopes and everything else. they're gonna take in a lot of effort and energy and investment to go to the next phase where you can properly develop and, I don't know, build something or whatever. Is that why it takes so long for that piece of land to become occupied?
I mean, I think what we've observed over the years in Williston is that those who own the land leave it in a really sort of an unconditioned state. And then, they market it and say, if you want to come here and do all of the work, we'll lease what's underneath it back to you to run your hotel or your store or whatever when you're done. But there's not a lot, there's been a little bit of pre-work of, Jeff Davis has had his guy, do some grading where there were sort of spoil piles of dirt over the years. And I only know because whenever he goes out and does that, I get phone calls, what's going in Taft Corners? That he's knocking over a pile of dirt. Don't get too excited. But that is, it's an added cost compared to someone who's marketing a level site with fewer requirements on it. That does definitely slow things down. I think in terms of like looking next door to Bed Bath and Beyond where the hotel was proposed, there's a lot of gradient there, obviously, but as Emily pointed out a couple times, if you look at it across the whole length of the lot, you can come out 5, if not 4%, which isn't so bad. Winooski in their form-based code is contending with far steeper streets. If you think about going down behind CCB and things like that. So, and some of the study work Jeff did for us about development standards when you're on a sloped street came out of that Winooski experience, which is just, a building of any adequate width along that street. The parking structure is going to poke out at the bottom and the floor above is going to be kind of stuck in up above. And so, getting ahead of that and adding some flexibility to the code on the sloped streets is a thing Emily and I have talked to Jeff about that he's working on.
Yeah, my main concern though is that if we leave it as it is, it will become more and more forced wetland or something that undevelopable.
Mhm.
And you lost the whole area or, that part of the piece, right?
Yeah, I do think if the town is able to successfully get Trader Lane permitted or even, begin construction on it, there's quite a lot of grading and work that happens just to do that, and that's an opportunity. It's also, there's a huge responsibility to upgrade stormwater treatment that comes from building Trader Lane. So if you look at a design of Trader Lane, it's the street and, everything in the right of way, but it's also the downstream upgrades to stormwater facilities. So to that question of, how can we make those an asset? Where do we think those are gonna go? How does that location play with the grid streets, particularly between Trader and Harvest Lane below? There's opportunity again to move those pieces around on the map. And maybe you do end up with a block that is already for building quite compromised with a stormwater facility. You say, well, let's just turn that block green for now. And see if maybe it's stormwater plus. I would encourage, I know I'm a broken record about South Burlington. The boardwalks through the wetlands behind Healthy Living are open now. That connect to Barrett Park, and it is really worth going over and just stroll the loop, go behind Healthy Living, walk over the one boardwalk, just keep turning left, go over the other one, come back out on Market Street and back on Garden.
And then does it exit on the Market Street far enough out to see the stormwater facility on Market Street, or is it?
Yes, because you come out right between the Duck Park or Goose Park, whatever it's called, with the sculptures and that big stormwater pond on the other side. So you can make a loop, take you 5 minutes, do it, as part of the grocery run. The two takeaways I have from now seeing that installed is, number one, it is one heck of a boardwalk. So when you want to go interact with wetlands, it is very expensive. It just is. The other part is what from, Google Earth or like poking my head through the woods, always looked like a kind of an unremarkable wetland, is incredibly beautiful. Now that you can stand on a boardwalk and look out over it, it opened up this spring, there's red-winged blackbirds, there's beavers, there's, in the heart of essentially this new downtown, there's actually an opportunity to go see some wildlife. To hear spring birdsong in the forest and all that good stuff. And so thinking a little bit about how, it's relatively small, but it really pulls a lot of weight for that area. And there's a lot of residents there who, that's the other thing, is now it's a draw. And there's people back there because people live right there and people are, going for a walk after dinner, they're walking their dogs, etc. But thinking through, you're seeing within that park are stormwater facilities that are actually providing treatment for the runoff from the street. The park itself is basically, when you really look at it, it's a couple of pathways around the stormwater ponds with some sculptures, some plantings, and some benches.
Yes.
But it's been done very, very well. It's that park can't be half an acre. It's really small for what it does. And then the natural wetlands are adjacent. So thinking through that access to green space, and I might feel different if I felt like there were 25 people who all wanted to build urban looking apartment buildings in Taft Corners tomorrow, but right now there are not. So the idea that you might have some bigger green spaces integrated in isn't running against any imminent demand from anybody. In fact, it's a little scary because there's like kind of no demand to build anything right now.
And if the town is engaged in building stormwater facilities that could serve more, not just the street, but the properties along it, then that would be a valid use of TIF money, because that would obviously increase the value of the properties because they already have stormwater there, and we would have been able to integrate it with green space.
To the extent that the stormwater's public infrastructure, TIF or CHIP, could be used, to fund that.
This is just a test. Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Only you're on your phone instead of your computer.
But yeah, we can hear you just
Yes,
fine.
but okay. That's good. Sorry, guys.
Hannah has her hand up.
Continue. I was just making sure that I'm present.
You're here. I was just gonna say in an observation along what you were saying, Matt, of like currently there is no development pressure effectively. I think that was one of the biggest standout observations of walking all of the space and like seeing the gradient difference. And like, I think that was the most daunting part of being like, there doesn't seem to be much pressure on the developer to like develop the land. Like the taxes on it are relatively low, is pretty much like there's not a lot of incentive to move forward on the development of it. And I think I wonder what levers we have. Like, what levers do we have there? Because, we can make a new map, we can do all these things, but if it's still just like more convenient and there isn't a benefit to, move forward on the map or develop the land, it stays in its weird hilly green field.
One thing I feel is just that developer has basically welcomed and worked with big box stores primarily. And by the way, Mickey, I remember when it was farmed and I went to the auctions from the farming. So to me, it's actually changing pretty fast. But on longer time scale, the 50-year time scale, it's made a lot of change in 50 years. Where now I distracted myself. Where was I going?
Development pressures
Oh, yes.
and stay this way. Yeah.
Thank you. So I feel like the developer was on the big box store train, and Williston doesn't want more big box stores. For one thing, it increases traffic problems. What we want is residential to balance the commercial that's in that area. And so I don't think the owner of the land is thinking residential. They're still thinking the way they've been thinking, working with big companies who are gonna put in a hotel or a big box store. So there's a missing piece. I think with the right developer, just the way in Finney Crossing and the annex, Snyder is finding a way to build residential stuff that's making money. I do think that it's not that there isn't any ability, it's that currently there isn't a match of that kind of activity with the current owner.
And like
That's-
vision or what?
Yeah,
Yeah, and we were having a conversation in the office earlier this week with someone who's involved in development and who was talking about, the residential side being difficult right now. And what his observation was the small, essentially family-owned residential developers in the area are moving forward because this is the work they do. And whether you make a lot of money doing it or a little money doing it, or sometimes you lose money doing it, it's the work they do, and it's worth it to keep the company alive, to keep the crews working, to continue to add to the portfolio. But the institutional investors in developing residential real estate don't see the numbers that would cause them to act right now. So, in Vermont, we have a lot of small, non-institutional real estate developers. We have more of that, in fact, than not. But in terms of, gaining financing for a big project with a longer outlook, you've got people looking at it saying, well, my tolerance for risk isn't that high. Or, it's not just risk of I don't want to lose money. It's like I have money to invest, but I could just stick it in a Vanguard fund and make money.
Well, and you
Why
pointed
would
out,
I?
yeah, during the walk, you pointed out that for some of these properties, the owners are not missing any meals because they have a fallow piece of land that's
No,
just sitting there. So the incentive for them to get something built is not
Right.
particularly high.
So, the question of what can you do, we've done some zoning reform, we're doing some more zoning reform. We're exploring ways that the town can encourage the infrastructure to come online, and we're hoping we can help people access some of the programs that, provide access to funds to get infrastructure online, but it's new territory for the town. It's not easy even for those who are quite experienced with it. And there's an element of how much risk the town takes on by getting ahead with infrastructure. But, if, for example, we were looking at a first phase of Trader Lane and the stormwater that comes with it, maybe that starts to gel into something. And I think the question is, if you're not in a TIF or a CHIP environment, how much of that might the town be able to do without an expectation of a big return in terms of new tax increment right away? Can we build Trader Lane today and not have anything built along it for 5 years? In the TIF framework, you can't do that. You'll just end up obligating taxpayers to pay for that road. So, we're in a similar, market and risk assessment mode as a result of that.
Yeah, I had two thoughts. I had a similar conversation with an engineer who helps with subdivisions and developments, and reflecting on an application where this family a long time ago, like back in the day, a subdivision was you draw a box on a map and you call it a plat, and that was that. And even before that, you want this chunk of land, here, I'll deed it to you, and that was that. And today the permit is a zoning permit, a state permit, a wetlands permit, water and wastewater, or a sewer permit. It's like all of these things, and then you need to figure out all of the construction and the infrastructure, who's gonna actually put all that in the ground for you. So just reflecting on how even within this like one legacy property, what they did to subdivide in the 40s and the 70s and today is so different. And our zoning and our subdivision process is just one proxy and one lever for how financing has become more complicated, and construction and employment has become more complicated, and all these other levels that play into it. My big takeaway from the walking tour, and I love Jeff Farrell. We get along on a lot of philosophical levels, but I think our major disagreement right now is how many grid streets are in that between Trader Lane and Harvest Lane. I'm a bit more of the mind that bigger blocks wouldn't be that bad there. And I kind of like the idea of mapping that back of Harvest Lane as a public green because we were standing there, we had this great view. It was kind of fun to watch the traffic and the life happen down below you and it wasn't right on top of you. And if it was I don't think developers are ever gonna fully scrape that Bed Bath and Beyond site, so it's level up to Hannaford. I think you're always gonna be working with that terracing, so what if we terraced in a green? And then there was a building off of it, and then it's western facing, so it's not quite an amphitheater, but in the summer, you have your back to, a warm park bench. And you're facing the western sun, and it's a little bit of a microclimate there for warmth in the winter and shade trees in the summer. And I think we can work with that Bed Bath and Beyond grade to still get the block form that we want, still get the buildings where it would be good, and flex a little bit and have some green space there. And if I was a pedestrian and I had to walk from that corner down to Resource before I could cut up to a street to Trader Wayne, well, if I'm a walker, we know there's gonna be pedestrian ways and alleyways, and I'm just gonna cut through on a diagonal through the parking lot. But as a driver, I don't think going from Harvest Lane down to Resource to get back up is that far of a distance. And maybe in the future, we do get that more granular block pattern in between the two. Yeah, Jeff and I had some fun kind of ruffling each other's feathers on that one on the tour.
And the part of what you said that resonates for me is thinking where's the green make the most sense and building the green into the plan. To me, when Trader Lane is built, if you make the green at that point, you're moving fill around anyway and grading stuff and putting drainage in. And you plant trees then 10 years later, when more things come in, you actually have a green that's more mature.
Mature and established, yeah. Yeah, I think, to Emily's point, looking at some of the sites that are most difficult grade wise. Also present some of the better opportunities for those parks that, have a view, particularly to the west. Other side of Marshall, corner of Harvest and Marshall, sort of the top of the plateau and the island is another one, and the first 250 feet of that is in form-based code, so. It might be worth just kind of thinking through. There might be some synergy between the lots that are gonna be the hardest to develop and the places that actually might have really nice green spaces, because when you don't need to fit an 80-foot building and a 20-foot fire lane and into the depth of the block, but you can fit a 75-foot wide green space, you're actually, you're doing pretty well. And that the Trader Lane green is a great example of that. It's really not deep enough to put the kind of buildings people are asking to build on there. And I wanted to lead into that because the other thing, the concern I have, and it came up when we were working with the hotel folks, is you don't want the first building on the block to create a lot of problems for the development of the rest of the block. And, our parking setback is 30 feet. And parking really is supposed to be behind, quote unquote, the building. Part of what that drives is not putting the parking as much in the way of future development. But when you're the first one on the block, you can have parking behind your building all the way across the block to within 30 feet of the other block face. And you've created a situation where that other block face is now never going to develop with a building. Unless suddenly Williston is like the last place in the entire United States to build buildings, and there's just so much demand.
That's a good point.
I would love to see that diversity of building styles and widths and people doing, little Philadelphia style, infill row homes but what happens for us right now is developers generally want the maximum building width on the block face or more, in the case of the hotel, but certainly they want that 180 feet. They generally want 80 feet of depth to accommodate an elevator on each end of the center hallway, which the fire department wants to be able to roll a gurney in and out of. So it's not just a small elevator, it's a big elevator, so the hallways are wide. 80 feet depth on a 300-foot block. If you've got buildings back to back, right, you've taken up 160 of the 300 feet, and things are starting to get, and each of them's got a 20-foot fire lane. You don't have a lot of room to work with very quickly in these smaller, more walkable blocks. And to Emily's point about sometimes maybe bigger blocks or blocks that don't have a street on one of the face because we're up against the side of the resource building, et cetera, maybe as good as we can do. But being able to accommodate that first development that comes in and say, well, you're going to build your parking, some of it will probably be shared parking eventually. But also we're trying to keep you from putting that parking in a place where it impedes the desired build out. And that's where I think you need to bring some focus to it. So for example, if you have a block that faces on Trader Lane and you really want Trader Lane to be lined with buildings, you might give in a little bit on the up and down streets, but really try to not preclude that development on Trader Lane. So just thinking about that, if you allow a 180-foot building and you've got two of them, well, you're more than 300 feet long on the block face at that point. You want to, and you really want those, like we have the hotel and the apartment building, you want both of those buildings there. You don't want a big gap.
Mhm.
So those are some of the considerations I think through is how do the blocks come together?
Are you feeling like if someone's building on a block and they have parking behind, that there should be a limit, it shouldn't be able to go to within 30 feet of the other end of the block, that there should be some reserve space?
I think that's a concern. I think that I've toyed with the idea of a clause that says something like, where there's a building between the parking and the street, the parking's got to be at least 30 feet back unless it's underground, which is pretty much what we say.
Yeah. If there's
And
no
then
building.
if there's no building,
100 feet, yeah.
It's 80 feet back.
Yeah.
I mean, similarly, we have a provision in there that's like, don't create an undevelopable lot,
Yes.
but it's a minimum lot width of 20 feet.
Mm.
Again, I would love it if people were building 20-foot wide infill buildings in Taft Corners. It would look like Copenhagen, but
Not yet.
that's, what people come in, what pencils and makes sense to build is an 180-foot long rectangular building with 80 feet of depth and a big center hallway right now. And we can get some pretty high quality stuff that way. And I think my other takeaway from walking around is just, there are a lot of wins in that code. Getting the balconies is a big win. Getting things to relate to the sidewalk grade and really activating that 5 or 7 foot dooryard between the building and the sidewalk is a big win. It really helps.
And the building articulations.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like the experience, we should have gone around and walked along the Soviet building. In the back, just to have the experience of what that sidewalk experience is versus what it's like, now on Market.
It would have been shady and it would have been cool.
It
which
would
might
have
been a
been
reflection
shady.
of you. But in the dead of winter, it is frigid.
How does the developer feel about the stuff done in the code?
As far as I know, so the hotel guys, there were some things about meeting the architectural standards that they found challenging, but they worked through it. I don't remember, like the siding and the window inset was one, the way that stairwell laid out was another.
Yeah. Andy wasn't quite sure. I think Andy said that they were able to meet the ADA requirement of the parking lot.
And not have to do it on the street with that
Um,
elevator.
Yep, and I'm not quite sure why it landed that way. Will Fontaine never got back to me, but I think probably having an elevator with 2 doors and that second half level
Yeah,
is just more expensive
oh, sure it is.
than just a 1-door elevator. I chatted with Scott Riley, because when we were gathering in classic Vermont, Scott Riley just walks by, who's on the DRB and the owner of Riley Properties. And he was like, oh, are you gonna fix the thing about the building height? So what really bothers him is that the hotel windows and the residential windows are a little bit offset, like they don't line up, which I don't really mind. It was more prominent when they were just before siding and they were just holes in the wall that didn't have windows. It looked really questionable, but once it finished, it looks fine. And I think with Jeff Farrell, you know, having a hotel where the hotel rooms are more like a residential unit that sit up a little higher and don't have quite as much glass, I think would solve some of that. But that was the only main thing I heard.
Yeah, and so one of the things we had talked about was basically treating hotels as a residential use. And how that might play out in terms of base elevation, which then drives the windows to a more reasonable size.
Yeah, kind of treating them like more like a residential for the size and height of the windows and rooms above the ground floor, but still requiring them to have some portion of that first floor facade that has the bigger windows, so it feels like a shop front. So maybe the lobby area or the breakfast area of the hotel feels more like that commercial building, so the whole thing doesn't feel residential.
Yeah.
That it still maintains that commercial, cornerstone to it.
Yeah, you don't want it to feel like the back of a hotel. Because those are very inactive spaces, and we might need to get a little more specific, like you said, about, common areas should have windows that activate out onto the street, because I think that does a lot of good for the hotel at Finney Crossing. It actually worked out with Home 2, not a form-based code building, but the breakfast room and the common areas look out onto the Curtis Lane extension path and then the little green.
Yeah.
And so the little hotel fire pits, they're sort of version of private open area, and the big windows into that common area all have some relationship to what's going on beyond the edge of the parcel.
Yeah.
So,
And I think that's another place for Jeff Farrell, and I disagree, like Jeff doesn't really like having like a green that doesn't front on a street, because a street is inherently public. But I kind of like that about the green, that the sidewalk separates you from the Finney Green and the hotel. But you can hear people nearby, you can see people nearby, and it still feels like this is a public domain, that's a private domain, even though there's not cars going through it. And like maybe if one side of Trader Lane or the Bed Bath and Beyond Terrace Park don't have a street frontage on them, they still feel public, and there's that public-private interplay.
yeah, we thought a little bit about that, like what if the resource building developed and it's got that frontage on Trader Lane, and I think we're gonna draw in sort of a super bike path that's sort of a non-car street essentially, so that you could imagine a building developing where your stoop goes out, it fronts the park essentially, but not a street. I mean, there is a lot about the form-based code that's trying to create these human scale streets and really leveraging the street as a highly valuable public space. And I don't think where there is gonna be a street, I don't think you wanna lose that. You want life on the street, that's really important. But some of these realities we're running into, to me at least, suggest, getting a little more creative sometimes.
Yeah.
Anything folks saw, I've been staring at these buildings for a long time, but like the buildings themselves or the sites or the architecture, anything anybody noticed about them that they wanted to think through?
Would be easier if the streets had been straight.
It's true.
Yeah, the solar thing that you were talking about, I don't even notice it until you pointed it out there.
solar on both sides.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was like, you mentioned it and pointed out that I realized it no eyesore at all. That's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, no, on those, having those pitched roofs covered in panels is.
That was fine, and it looked as though runoff was coming down gutter downspouts.
Yes,
So there's not this water dropping 4 stories.
no, And we did write some provisions, there are some provisions in the code about, using, I forget what they're called, but the things that break up ice and snow coming off the steep roofs, because we were encouraging a pitched roof up high and,
Yeah,
you know. My guess is
you
that,
have brackets that keep it from sliding.
you know, their insurance company's gonna make them do
Yeah.
that, but we also wanted to, state that that was important.
Also, we have the dooryard before you get to the sidewalk.
Right, so hopefully that stuff isn't falling.
So it
Four
reduces
stories.
the risk to the public.
Nothing jumped out at me that I can think of.
No, I felt really successful. It, you know, there were challenges in that site and with what that was doing, and yet they had worked them out. I mean, the way they worked out the trash behind the apartment building is amazing.
Yeah, I think, there's a nice balance happening where the public realm gets an attractive street and it doesn't feel like the back of a building in either case. The folks who live and work and are staying at the hotel, you know, yeah, they're mostly coming into the parking lot side. But the parking lot side, even though the code doesn't really ask for it to be especially aesthetically pleasing, is pretty decent. You know, it's like once somebody's building that higher quality that the code demands, it seems to translate over even into places where the code's not outright requiring it. And so that's an observation I've made. I also think the pedways between the buildings that let you get into the block faces are really important. And, you know, making sure those are safe and welcoming and, you know, don't collect trash, that kind of thing is really important.
What, Matt, what do you mean by that? That it like bleeds over?
The sidewalks that run between the buildings from the street to the back.
No hiding corner, right? That's what.
Yeah, they're well lit. There isn't anything anybody can kind of hide behind. You know, they're the opposite of the proverbial dark alley.
Right.
Right?
And they're inviting. They're
Yeah.
landscaped and inviting.
Yeah, gosh, did I take any pictures of when we were at that particular spot? No. But yeah, Shayla, if you're like driving on Market Street by Spaghetti, like look at the little alleyway between the hotel and the apartment building, the red and gray apartment building,
The pedestrian
the
alleyway.
pedestrian alleyway. It's got like a little doggy poop bag there, you know, right off the sidewalk. And I think it's pretty nice and welcoming.
It is.
Got it. Okay.
I gotta run next door and
Thank
talk
you.
about permit fees.
Oh, so
I
fun.
have my key if you guys end before I get back. It's always something.
Have fun.
Thank you for all the insight. I've got some good notes already and we'll debrief. Yeah.
Yeah,
Any other stuff? Based on what we discussed so far, though, what is stopping us from putting a placeholder green on those and develop area? If we want some sort of green or some sort of, you know, water catchment area, what kind of stuff? Is it already there or it's something that we gotta force upon today?
so are you talking about specifically about the one at Maple Tree Place?
Yes.
Yeah, with the transit hub and possibly having the police substation, so that would be. I'm not 100% sure, but it probably means the town figuring out some money in capital funding and bonds. And trying to get other state or federal matches to help with the cost of developing that. If there were to be a police substation in Taft Corners and if it would be there, that would be something driven, you know, by the police department and in developing, you know, a capital budget plan with them. There are some rumblings about maybe doing, an emergency services impact fee to cover that kind of stuff. Whether it's police or fire having a substation in that district. Trying to pull up the plans for that.
I was the town's commissioner on Green Mountain Transit for 10 years, and the immediate benefit of doing that is that the Walmart parking lot is not the transfer station.
Mm,
Right now, that's
It
where
is.
buses meet. However, we've lost the number 10 that went to Essex Junction, and so no longer do we have buses that need to meet.
You're even talking about number 2 also, right?
Yes, so number 2 goes there and stops and picks up there. That's its end of its route. If we had a transit center at the Taft Corners, that would be the destination. And we might change the route so it goes by the others and then back out. There also might want to go by the park and ride at the interstate in case people take the bus to there, because that a couple times a day a bus stops at that park and ride. But unless you parked your car there, you can't go anywhere unless you want to walk all the way down. So there's basically a lot of things, but a whole lot of that plan was premised on having the 2 routes that needed to connect, the one to Essex Junction and the one to Burlington, the number 2 and the number 10. Now that we don't have the 10, it's not as big a deal that the number 2 stops and turns around at Walmart instead of here. Also, the town eventually might have some sort of municipal ride offering service. Essex Junction has a senior bus that they lease from Green Mountain Transit, and it's used for various things. There's been talk about having micro transit here and how can people who live in the more rural parts of town come by bus there and still get home. Right now, they can't if they don't have a car. And so there's a whole lot of future needs, I would say, that haven't gelled. And so even though I'm a real advocate for public transportation and for this kind of thing, I want to see them gel more, and then I want to see more happen than a building park 2 buses. I want to see a building that's a civic attraction and could include a police outpost and all that. And I just feel like we're not there. It's not the right time to push for that. The fact that we have identified that piece of property and the fact the town already has access to that property is fantastic.
Yeah, to me though, it's more of, this could be 5 years or 10 years down the road
Yes.
kind of things. One, you will have a aging population
Yes,
and they may or may not be able to drive. And
yes,
they have an option for like minibus or something like that,
yes,
can go around the town kind of things.
yes.
Sorry, maybe
And
that's where,
There's been a committee
Everything
called the
up
multimodal committee that was looking at all that. And part of their idea was, in addition to having a station there, to have park and ride parking in the Shaw's parking lot, the part at the top of that picture where it's not used. So that it park and ride, people by car, by bike, or by bus could transit from one to the other seamlessly there using partly Shaw's parking lot in addition to that. But it's like there's no, in that plan there's no parking for charging stations for people. There's no, it
Bike
doesn't show
lockers.
bike locks. It doesn't, to me, that's like the bare minimum, be able to park 2 buses. And I would really like to see us get to a point where we could do better than that.
Yeah, one thing that came up on the tour, I was remiss, I printed 2
Twice, yeah.
twice, copy page 2. Which showed alternative 2 that shows it swooping into the property more, and someone was like, golly gee, this takes up a lot of land. I'm like, oh no, there was another alternative too.
yeah, this one made more sense, right? Then it's passed through.
I
Instead of
think
the-
this one makes more sense, even though it
Yeah.
takes more land, and that the building would go to the left of that, still within that, so that you not only have the 2 buses out there, but you have a bus terminal.
And there's still so much space,
Yes,
and
and to the north end, you would have a playground or something, to the south end, or to the south end, you have a playground or something.
Mhm.
But yeah, I actually like this one better because it
Yeah,
takes it off the street. That's not a very wide street.
yeah.
That's the wrong kind of ash tree too. They're going one by one.
The poor ash trees.
Do you know we surveyed our street trees in 2004 and noted that 60% were green ash, and so we should do more diversity. And then the ash borer, that was before anybody even heard of the ash borer. And now the ash borer is here. And you know what? We have more than 60% of our street trees are green ash because nobody did anything about it after we studied it and reached that conclusion. It's too bad. It's not as bad as when the elms all went. Because if you see all the pictures of streets in Burlington before the elms went, they're just so beautiful. By the way, in Winooski, they're finishing up finally Main Street after digging it up 3 years in a row or something. But you'll notice the tree, there's no green space between the street and the sidewalk. It's hardscape. And the trees are there's stones around the trees, and some of them have cage, but mostly they're just, so it's gonna be trees only, no grass. And that means, to me, what we have designed is much better because we have 7 feet of green space between the street and the sidewalk.
I think it depends on which street section,
Okay.
and there's also the private dooryard between the buildings.
Yes, there's
and
a
the sidewalk
dooryard
that-
for sure.
That covers most of it.
But from the sidewalk to the street, that's an area where people have their dogs pee and poop. It's an area where people can get out of their car, can do whatever. And it's an area where snow has room to be pushed from both the sidewalk and the street. Whereas what's in Winooski, if they plow the street, it's gonna be on the sidewalk. And so it's just too crowded in, and I feel the same thing about Five Corners and Essex Junction. It's all hardscape from the street to the building. On the new ones on Park Street, it's completely that way. And I'm so glad that we have the green strip. I wanted it to be wider, but then Jeff was right, that if you have it wider, then the distance crossing the street becomes longer because the buildings are farther apart and all that. It's a trade-off.
Okay. Are we concluding the discussion? We're closing to 8 p.m.
I do have one more comment about all this, which is I really think we can learn we just walked through all that, and especially the part on Market Street here where the hotel and apartment building are. If we walk Five Corners and Winooski and Market Street in South Burlington, we see where they have either succeeded or fumbled. And right now in Market Street in South Burlington, riding a bike through there is not good. There's a nice wide sidewalk and there's a road, but there's parking on the side of the road, and you can't ride your bike through there easily. And so they got a lot of things right, but they missed something. So, I mean, maybe we want to individually do that, but I do encourage people, check out those 3 experiments, if you will, in having pedestrian oriented streets that have the buildings closer to the road and all that.
Yeah, I think the last example I'll add to that is in Waterbury, when they did the Main Street project. There are sections where there's not green space, but they did the stamped concrete between the curb and the sidewalk. And when they plow snow, they just have to remove that snow and just get it off site. So they'll plow the street, they'll plow the sidewalk. There's a little bit of conflict, but then at night they come through and they just take it off that space. And there might be some places where having that narrower street and having that even narrower, shorter between the buildings and to cross the street. Downtown Waterbury, it doesn't have trees in those areas. You have hanging planter baskets and barrels that fill that life. But then there's all this other green space around it. So that core downtown area, it's a little warmer, but then you're just 2 seconds to the nature path. And it provides that buffer. And maybe there's a district of Williston where it could be a little narrower. And you are gonna have to just truck snow off of the sidewalk, off of that strip to meet the demand.
That's all the big cities do,
Mhm.
even Burlington.
Yeah, And what the private developers have to do is with all of their parking lots.
Yes,
There's not enough space anywhere to pile it all.
although that's what Shaw's uses that unused part of their parking lot for, is they store
Yes.
stove.
Tobacco.
So
And they
the
store
ones,
machine too.
the ones that have too much parking can do that, but the Finney Crossing where we right size the parking, they can't do that at Healthy Living.
Yeah, the healthy living parking lot is often very full.
Mm.
It overflows into the hotel too, or whatever it's called.
And vice versa.
You can still almost always find parking, so
Mhm.
I do think it is mostly the right size.
Mhm. Well, it's nice that it's being so successful that it's constantly that busy.
Yeah, that's also great.
Yeah, there's.
All right, well, I wanted to say thank you again to everybody who went off schedule. I was sorry I couldn't go, but thank you for going. Emily, I know Matt sent the list, the long list. I don't think we need to go through that tonight, but just noting that it's there for folks. You want to look at it. It's getting longer. The bylaw 2.0. Is there anything else on our agenda? It is 8, and I do want to respect that folks took the time to go do this the other day.
Nope.
We're good.
Emily, is there more that you want us to discuss?
I could come up with things if you wanted to go to 9 PM.
No, I'm happy to go.
Right. Well, in that case, sorry about my tech problems. I don't know what my issue was, but thanks for hanging in there with me. We will see you all in 2 weeks.
Sounds wonderful.
Right.
Bye, Shayla. Bye, Hannah.
Thank you, Emily.
Thanks, guys.